Ready when you are.
All right, go for it.
3, 2, 1. Good evening, good afternoon. Welcome to Autist Circle number 14, Edward Hopper.
Yeah, today we're going to be talking about Edward Hopper, the American painter. He was an American realist painter of the early 1900s. He painted a lot of stuff, kind of industrial stuff, and so that's what we're going to look at here. That's who we're going to talk about today. So, first thing, we're going to talk about where he is in the art timeline. So, as far as art history goes, he was a realist painter, so he falls within the realism kind of camp. But there were a lot of movements around him. So I'll just have whatever here. So while Hopper is recognized as American realism of the Ashcan school, he always thought himself as more of an impressionist. His art adopted the airy, lighted environments of the Impressionists, which helped to give his work a stark and bright appearance. The tonal atmosphere of his paintings are often a contrast between a bright palette mixed with stark scenes that make the scenes more psychological and introspective. He was contemporary to many other abstract and realist painters as well. So, Repin, he was alive during that time too. So he died previous to this, but prior to him, but he was still somewhat contemporary. And then there were a lot of other artists that were very contemporary to him. His career spanned so many shifts in modern and popular culture, yet he remained a quiet, stolid painter of quiet scenes without abstraction. He was not an acolyte of modern abstract art, although he was a fan of Picasso and others later on. His scenes, specifically his regionalism, since he painted in New York City where he lived, portray uniquely American identity. A uniquely American identity creates a narrative for rural and urban isolation and sadness. Of the liminal spaces between relationships, of the spaces between, on our way to our destinations. And it helps communicate the vastness of America and the vastness of spaces spaces between people in an ever alienating urban landscapes of the post-depression era. His art sits at a unique period in art history, as the proliferations of commercial art that Hopper himself helped to foster and also despised so much. Hopper's grasp of realism and reality of the alienation of city life, along with his meticulous attention to detail and layout and the interplay of light and shadows, sets as a realist painter with a firm grasp on modernist psychology. And although his paintings portray a mood of symbolism, he did always feel himself an impressionist at heart. So, we're gonna jump forward to his childhood. So, Edward Hopper was born on July 22nd in 1882 in Nyack, New York, to Garrett Henry and Elizabeth Griffith Smith Hopper. He was raised a middle-class and conservative family, and his parents encouraged reading and writing. There was a lot of books and stuff in his house. They were very bookish people themselves. And this is a picture here we have with him and his sister, who was 2 years older than him. He was a shy, bookish child, and he was fascinated by the boats in the nearby Hudson River and architecture and just drawing modern life. He started drawing at a very early age. I think he was around 8 when he really started drawing, and he started to sign his paintings and drawings at the age of 10 because he felt even then that his work was profound, which I think is interesting. By the age of 12, go ahead, dude.
No, Maureen just popped in and has an interesting comment, which is kind of getting into your how he draw his art. And her comment is, it seems like there's something horrible about to happen and you can't see it.
Yeah.
It's kind
It
of a fascinating atmospheric
it
tale right there.
it is. It's very true. And we'll get into that. So, by the age of 12, he was 6 foot tall by the age of 12. So he was kind of an alienated
Oh,
kid on his own. Yeah, he was. You know, you know how kids are. They're gonna make fun of him, tease him. So he learned to kind of be on his own really early. Um,
mhm.
uh, but at that age, also, he was producing exceptional art, and his teachers at the time noted as such. He was doing pen and ink, charcoal, and watercolors, and his subjects mainly were things that he'd copy from magazines and illustration books because his family had lots of illustration books and stuff like that. They've got that for him. In 1899, at
Interesting.
the age of 17, he decided to pursue a career in art. He decided, when he was done with high school, that's what he was going to do, was be an artist. But his parents were incredibly practical. And they were like, okay, well, you can be an artist, but you have to do something. You have to do something that will make money, that is stable. You
Mhm.
can't just be one of these airy, arty painters. You have to actually do something that's going to secure you a future. Um, and so they insisted that he gets professional schooling and become a commercial illustrator because that was a really uh, popular thing at the time. Magazines were starting to become very big. Magazines were huge. Like, we
Oh
don't think
yeah.
about that for like now because of the proliferation of everything online. But before online, it was all magazines. All the interest shit, people didn't go to websites or Facebook pages. They had magazines for it. And a lot of the stuff they still do. And so
Well,
he was
it's interesting. To kind of an aside with the pen and ink that he was copying. That was one of the big things that gave rise to Sherlock Holmes's popularity. Not just the stories, but also the illustrations. So that whole era where it's kind of proto filmmaking and a little illustration between the author and the artist just makes it that much more accessible to the general audiences.
yeah,
Just very cool.
absolutely. So he to get his schooling, he briefly enrolled at the New York School of Illustrating. And then eventually he went to the New York School of Art, which was a much more prestigious institution. So, a young Hopper. So, from 1900 to 1905, while at school, he studied under several influential artists, three of which were particularly important. There was Robert Henry. He was a leader of the Ashcan School of Art, like I mentioned previously. So, similar to like the Hudson River School that we talked about with Bierstadt, he
Hmm.
fell into this school called the Ashcan School, and founded by Robert Henry. And what he encouraged was people to paint reality as it was, as dark and gritty, and as meet reality on its term and its terms, and don't polish it, just show it how it is. The
Hmm.
next person, William Merritt Chase, he was a technical painter, really a technical master, and he taught Hopper composition and really discipline, how to do his work. So one of the things that Hopper is best known for is the composition of his work, and he and his wife worked so meticulously on each one of his major works to ensure that the layout was what they wanted. They would spend weeks planning paintings sometimes.
Hmm.
So, and then the last, Kenneth Hayes Miller, who emphasized control and classical form and help Hopper understand how to really capture tonality in his work, to use his work to set a scene.
Hmm.
Hopper was also a great admirer of Whistler and other realist painter at the time. He also
Mhm.
greatly admired draftsmanship, and he loved architectural drawings. Um, his family had architectural books when he was growing up, and so he would look at those, and he was fascinated. And of course, at the time, this was the transition from kind of the more Victorian era architecture to, in the 20s and the shift in society from the 1900s to the 40s was pretty
Oh,
cataclysmic,
it's
right?
very stark.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah. It really gets into how the First World War shaped everything. Yeah,
right.
from global politics and then deeply into art. I mean, you see art drawn during the war and how it evolves, and then the Art Nouveau movements, and then some of these other later art movements that build off of that.
Right.
So, yeah,
Yeah.
very, very cool stuff.
And it was also, you know, it was a great shift in, that's like when Frank Lloyd Wright came out and a lot of really great American architects. And so he was fascinated with architecture, as was a lot of America at the time. So once he got out of school and he started working, um, he fucking hated it. He hated being an illustrator. And so by 19, he really wanted to be an artist, but he hated being an illustrator. So by about 1906, he made his first trip to Paris to work with great masters and to learn and observe the art at the time. Um, he at the time, Paris was seen as a necessary stop for anybody who was a serious studio artist. Anybody who knew anybody in the art world spent time in Paris and did that, which makes sense because, you know, at the time there were lots of really amazing painters in Paris. And also, Paris wasn't a completely terrible shithole back then, like it is now. It used to be a nice city.
Oh yeah, and one filled with art and culture and social movements, for good and ill.
Yeah. And so while he was there, he studied Impressionism a lot. He had a particular fondness for Degas, and his work has taken a lot of cues from Degas in form of layouts and perspectives. And next season, when we cover Degas, tune in for next season. Edward Degas, you'll see how he framed things in such a way that it made you more part of the image in kind of a voyeuristic fashion. So you're looking on in kind of an intrusive or odd angle on a lot of his works. And Hopper really took that to heart. But while he was there, he largely ignored, like he later learned of Picasso and everything, but while he was in Paris, he didn't know who Picasso was. And Picasso was a contemporary.
Good man.
Yeah, so he didn't know who Picasso was back then. He ignored the more abstract and surreal art movements prominent in Paris and focused more on landscapes and cityscapes in both oil and watercolors, because that's what he liked, was the architecture. So his subsequent trips in 1909 and 1910 helped him further refine his work, with each trip focusing on different aspects just to help him clean it up a bit. After his last trip, he said that he got all of Europe he needed from Paris, and he never went back to Europe for that.
I mean, that's a fair assessment. I can understand that if you're in the art world, and yeah.
You know, I've been to Paris once for a few hours while I was catching a plane, changing planes at Charles de Gaulle. That was enough. So
yeah. I drove through the outskirts, and it's like, you know, I can see the skyline. The traffic's flowing. I'm not that dumb to go this inside.
Right. Okay, so when he came back from Europe, we'll go on to the next one here. So while in Paris, he safely avoided avant-garde and abstract ideas, but he also avoided having patrons or buyers or gallery representation when he returned. And so he was unable to get by on painting alone, and he returned to the most stable option available to him, which was illustration. And what I have here is one of his illustrations that he did for a hotel management magazine. And this is why he did not like he did not necessarily like illustration. Illustration was too constricting for him, and it did not give him any artistic freedom. There's no room for interpretation or anything in this. It just has to be straightforward. So,
yeah.
So throughout the 1910s, he worked for trade magazines, ad firms, tech journals, many other. The work demanded clean, literal, non-expressive images in readable compositions with no ambiguity and a strict deadline. He found all of these stifling and restrictive, but he was nonetheless an award-winning commercial illustrator And he was later quoting as saying that commercial illustration made him feel like a slave to the market. So this
Yeah.
the Morse dial um, pic uh, image I have up here now,
Mhm.
the commercial illustration link in there. This was an award-winning poster he did called "Smash the Huns," and it was a World War One propaganda poster for
Although
the
dated February 1919, so
yeah,
that's really curious.
yeah. So, but that was one of his award-winning illustrations. He won many awards for his commercial illustrations. But during this period, he had nearly no private sales. Except for with small exception. In 1913, he sold his very first painting, which was called Sailing. He painted in 2 years prior. He sold it for $250 at the Armory Show in New York. That is about $8,000 or I think it was eight. Yeah, it's like $3,000 in today's money. So it's not an insignificant amount of money. And the
Mhm.
sale emboldened him. It kept him going because he was about to give up on painting. He was so discouraged. And then in 1915, he began experimenting with etching, um, which he found gave him another new creative outlet for his work, and it helped him refine his voice as an artist. And from 1915 to 1922, when he did do his etchings, they were often showcased darkened streets and isolated figures that were precursors to his later works. And his etchings were heavily influenced by the chiaroscuro that he saw in the. So I cut that off in the slideshow. He was heavily influenced by the chiaroscuro that he saw in the Baroque paintings, in the Caravaggio paintings, and particularly Rembrandt.
Mhm.
He really loved Rembrandt. So Hopper, while in Europe, looked at many Rembrandt paintings and felt that the Night's Watch that we covered previously was one of the most superb paintings of all time. He
Mm.
observed the use of Rembrandt's chiaroscuro and used it to help portray empty streets and isolation in his etchings. So, as you can see in this painting, this is a very or in this etching, it's a very lonely scene of a man out by himself. It's a very interesting and noir scene too. Um,
Yeah. It's also got a lot of nice subtle detail, from the fire hydrant to the almost legible marquee.
yeah,
It's very it's detailed, but it's also extremely stark. And I do think that kind of sets the tone, as you've already said, but
yeah,
it like sets it and it's like slaps you in the face with it.
right. And this one's called Night Etching. This one's 1921, and of course, it demonstrates his uh, classic noir that would become kind of a hallmark of his work. In 1923, he had stopped etching because his paintings had started to get traction, and that's because in 1923 he met Joe Nivison, uh, who was an established artist and rising artist in New York. She had been in New York for a long time. She went to New York Art School with him, not with him, but she went to the New York School of Art as well at a later time.
Mhm.
Um, so they, so she persuaded that same year, she persuaded the curators of an upcoming show of hers to include some of Hopper's Gloucester watercolors. So he had recently taken a vacation to Gloucester or Gloucester. You say
Gloucester.
it, Gloucester. There you go, Gloucester. He had taken a vacation to Gloucester for a little while, where with Joe's encouragement, she told him to pick up. She encouraged him to pick water painting back up. He'd been working with etching and oil mostly.
Oh.
He had largely set the watercoloring aside, and so he started producing these really amazing and very crisp and clean images of the houses and the boats at Gloucester, and they were very popular. Of course, because they were so clean, but also for watercolors. To say his works were wildly popular and sold very well at the show. They were tight and crisp watercolors, which was contrary to the normal style of watercolors, which is usually more fluffy and airy, and his use of light. his understanding and use of light in his images was exceptional, and so much so that it actually, people actually picked up a few of his paintings here. And this was a major turning point for Hopper in his career. Um, it was really the moment that he did establish himself as an actual artist and not just an illustrator who painted on the side. So here's so we'll go on to Joe. In 1924, in the wake of his great success, Joe and Edward married, and they would remain married until Edward's passing in 1967, and Joe would only pass 10 months later. She would only outlive him by 10 months. Their relationship was tumultuous but long-lasting and enduring. They often got into physical altercations, and there were plenty of rough times. Still, Joe would never let Edward go. Once they married, she became jealous and possessive at times. She would be his only female model from then on. Every piece of work that Hopper does from this point forward only has Joe as the model. Which is interesting when you look at the variety of people in it. So, and it isn't
really weird.
Yeah, it's mostly the physical model. It's not always her face, but it's always her body modeling for him in the images. So, well, she wouldn't allow him any others, and he didn't really want him anyways. He was entirely devoted to her. She was his muse and his greatest supporter, but also his greatest source of internal struggle and pain. As with many great romances from artists who feel passion so deeply, theirs was a complicated yet powerful and strong relationship. And she was the source of all his success and joy and a good portion of the misery he had in his life. They were kind of made for each other. He was...
The question I have is, did he cut anything off during this time? Go full...
He remained fully intact throughout the whole relationship. So now, I believe it was his relationship with Joe that helped him become so familiar with loneliness and isolation and the spaces between people. Because he was a man who desperately wanted to please people around him, but he didn't always know or understand how. And that's especially hard when you have a miscommunication with your partner. It can lead to a great rift. I can say this as a twice divorced person. I've gone through that, where that great rift sets you apart. The only difference is that my wife's left me.
Well, and you weren't just using them as your only muse, so there's that too.
Yeah. So, anyhow, so with that, we'll jump into the actual first painting we're going to talk about today, which is the House by the Railroad, which he painted in 1925. And it was considered to be his breakthrough work in oil. It's a 24 by 29 image of a Victorian style house from an angle behind some railroad tracks. So we're situated on the other side of the tracks from the house. Hopper rode the L train to work for years when he worked downtown at the ad agencies and stuff. And he saw a lot of buildings and stuff like this from behind the tracks. And he saw the city grow and watched it fill in. And these older kind of Victorian anachronistic style houses get moved and replaced by high rises and apartment buildings. So the house is framed in a way that's similar and it's familiar to a lot of his works that we'll see. You can look, but you can't go there. There's no way in. There's no way over there. That house is on the far side of there. And you can't actually see the door in this painting either. Which is it's a theme in his paintings that you can only look at it from a distance. You can't, you observe. You can't actually be part of it. Which is...
just another observation about his earlier style here. It's almost like an architectural layout in a sense.
Very
with
much
how straight everything is.
Yeah, absolutely. He was very tight with his lines. He was very meticulous about his layoffs. So the nostalgic style tonality of this calls back to a more archaic time, because by the 1920s, this architecture style had become more archaic. Like the Victorian style residents were not the same, and everything was getting more Art Deco style, kind of newer, you know, square blocky crap, minimalist stuff.
Yeah. Yep. And streamlined and not, thankfully brutalist, but it definitely inspired some brutalist architecture.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So in 1930, the Museum of Modern Art in New York purchased this painting, and that really, when they did that, it really gave him a huge boost, because it was a big deal. Then it really put him, it made him one of the more iconic painters at the time. It made him a name that people knew. This painting would actually go on to inspire Alfred Hitchcock, because this is the Bates house is modeled after this painting.
Oh god.
Yeah. So the Bates house is also, the Addams Family mansion is inspired by this painting.
Yes, indeed. Holy crap.
Right?
Yeah.
Right? So he's a lot of famous artists, or a lot of famous directors and producers have cited this, among other works of his, as influences in their work because of his kind of theatrical layout and the brilliant use of the lighting, the light and the shadow, the contrast on there, and the stark angularity of everything. So, with that, we'll hop over to his next painting. And this one was in 1927, and this one is called Automat. So it's a 28 by 36 oil on canvas, and this is currently on display at the Des Moines Art Center in Iowa, which is funny. And this shows an image sitting alone in a New York Automat, which those were self-service cafeterias kind of style things. They were really popular in the 20s.
Yep.
And this is Joe modeling for him here. She modeled for the study of this urban loneliness. So this woman's sitting here at night. She's alone at night, staring into her cup of coffee. The reflection of the lights in the blackened window, because they would blacken the windows from the inside so people wouldn't be looking in or out on these things. The reflection of the lights shows she's sitting at the far side of a pretty long building. And she's in the corner by herself, alone. And you can see the door is slightly out of frame almost, or where the door would be. But again, you can't get to it. You're trapped in the frame here. There's no way out of this frame. You're stuck here. And again, this is kind of taken from and the perspective on this again is somewhat voyeuristic. You're not viewing her from straight on. You're looking at her from a distance where you are kind of you're
intruding.
Yeah, you're kind of spying on her in a way, And this is a really interesting picture because she only has one glove on. Which kind of shows she's resting and it's night. It's late at night. And she's resting. She only has one glove on. She could be in distress. You don't know. So the woman, she's kind of being swallowed by the city. And in a way you can see how she's just destined to become another tragic tale of urban heartache. Somebody who thought they could make it, and then they just end up tired and jaded and beat up and run down. And there's so much, there's a lot of questions in here. There's a lot of ambiguity, and then also there's a lot of tension because you don't know, is she resting? Is she hiding? Is she running away? Did she leave her glove at the scene where she just murdered someone? You don't know.
If it was only a T-Rex, it could be Maureen. Yes, I see this clearly now.
Yeah, it does. You're right, Maureen. It does have it has similarities to the Absinthe Drinker by Degas, and like
Hmm.
I said, he was heavily influenced by Degas, and so they probably did draw, some of the layout for this. And this was another thing Joe modeled. They tried a bunch of different stuff before they actually settled on this one and 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 did it. Did this painting, made this painting. Um, this was the beginning of his night interior paintings, which is another theme that would run throughout his work, because being out in the city at night when there's not people out, like when you're out in the city that's not downtown, when you're not out by the bars, when you're out near the office
Mhm.
buildings, and there's just nobody there. It's a weird feeling, to be out in the city at night when there's nobody else around. It feels, to me, you always feel a little somewhat intrusive and always a little
And
uncomfortable.
also, that's what I've always kind of gotten around when you're in what should be a bustling place, and then it's just you, or you and maybe a companion or someone off in the distance, and it feels so strange and alien.
Yeah, yeah. Um, and so that's kind of the feeling that his paintings are really going for a lot of the time. So we will jump over. We're doing here. Well, man, we might we might run a little short on this one actually. Um, my presentation done too well. So jump over and talk about his professional life. So those were both painted in the 20s. So in his 30s, he finally received enough recognition and representation, and his works were selling regularly. And his exhibitions were widely celebrated. I got a typo here. For the first time in his life, he had financial stability without doing a job that he fucking hated. Um, doing a job that he didn't feel like was slavish to him.
Hmm.
And his work was uniquely suited to portray the feelings of many in Depression era America, because this was the 30s. This when we were going into the Depression. Many felt desolated and disaffected and isolated, and his work did not did not directly reflect the poverty and struggle that many at the time felt, but his work demonstrated them to many, and he demonstrated psychological realism at the time. And during this time, he produced many works with singular figures, another theme that would become popular in his work. Hopper was able to catch the naked city in a way that breaks it down into surfaces of facades, shadows, and angles, and uninhabited spaces. Empty storefronts, they become props in a background. Kind of mysterious, but not, uh, not explored, and always leaving questions.
Hmm.
And during the 30s, he also developed many themes that would recur through his art in the form of hotel rooms, which he liked to paint because of the transient nature of hotel rooms and their stories. Um, and he also developed a more cinematic style of framing for his images, um, which, as previously mentioned, inspired a generation of movie directors and cinematographers. Uh,
Mhm.
and throughout the 30s, Joe and Edward traveled extensively around New York or New England, where they witnessed quiet farmhouses, lonely railroads, empty gas stations, and other things that he would later end up incorporating into his work. So,
I have to, and this is wild speculation, but the cinematic nature of his evolving art style, it almost seems to parallel, either intentionally, accidentally, what have you, with the art development in movie making at that time. Because you have, when you watch an old movie, maybe it's something like Metropolis or something of that nature. It's very dark, as far as being very unpopulated, not very lived in
right.
environments in a sense. And I see that in some of his art here, and I just have to wonder, was there a connection there, or did these just happened to be completely coincidental.
Well, it's interesting because he was a great admirer of cinema. You know, he loved film and photography as well. And so he did take some of his inspiration from that. And I mean, and in reality, there's very little difference between the great layouts in cinematography and great layouts in a painting. You know,
Mhm.
there's a lot of things that you can parallel between the two. I mean, it's just the layout of a scene, um, or learning how to incorporate a scene that makes it so that you can uh comprehend it, I guess. So
Yeah. It's like, with the blocking of not just people but objects and
right.
all that.
And and and
Interesting.
and it allows for maximum, then you can do that for if you know how to do that properly, you can manipulate that for maximum effect. So you can take those empty spaces and while they don't have to be a giant painting, these aren't Bierstadt or even Rembrandt size paintings. They're normal painting sizes. Um, and so in order to emphasize those kind of spaces and the isolation in that way and getting the whole scene, it did take some meticulous layout and design. Um, which that was him and Joe. Joe was she was a record keeper too, so she would take record of all of his, like if they were setting up a scene, they would try a pose and then she would record it and then they would do a pose and she would write it down and then they would do a pose and then they would go back and compare notes, and then when he wanted to do a painting, he would like get out a freaking draft board and draw out the lines of how he wanted stuff to be. He was an
Hmm.
incredibly meticulous painter. Um, and the crisp, clean lines in his work, I think, are really like they just kind of speak to that. So back to where we were talking about, him and Joe traveled around in the 30s. So in 1940, he painted a scene called Gas, which we're looking at here. And it depicts a lone gas station on the edge of a highway. And the painting kind of symbolizes the edge of civilization, where men's cities give way to the woods and the countryside. And this is different back then, because there weren't as many actual towns. you know, Even in
Yeah.
the 30s, like this gas station, even looking so modern and nice as it is, may have been on the super outskirts of town, far away from everything.
I mean, yeah, it could have been the only establishment for dozens of miles.
Yeah, absolutely. So the scene features a smartly dressed attendant dutifully minding the pumps as twilight lingers, and you can tell that by how the shadows and the light are elongating on the ground there.
Mm-hmm.
And this is a scene which many people can relate to, especially if you've driven around in a small town in the woods at twilight and came across a service station, or and I've had this a few times where I'm traveling someplace late at night and I got kids sleeping in the car and a wife sleeping in the passenger seat. And it's like, man, I just need to stop somewhere and get a drink. You're just out in the middle of nowhere. And then all of a sudden you're just like, oh God, I found this friggin' gas station out. It's such like to me,
Yeah.
it's such like a cool and hopeful feeling. Like I'm
Yeah.
so,
Yeah.
it's like you found an
It,
oasis in the desert.
I was about to say an oasis of civilization there. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, and that's very much what this painting represents, is the oasis of civilization on the edge of the dark wood. Um, so it kind of is an appeal to the wanderlust of Americans as well, uh, because this is not a destination, right? This is someplace
Hmm.
along the way. It's not someplace that you are driving like, oh no, yeah, let's go out to the mobile gas station. Which I need to point out that. So yeah, this is a mobile gas station, and he's done such a great job of doing the actual mobile gas logo. Because back then the
Hmm.
mobile gas logo used to be a Pegasus, and so
Yeah.
he's captured that pretty well on the sign. And
even on the pumps themselves,
Yeah.
you know what it is. It's not
Yeah.
just, oh yeah, here's this little splash of red. No, it's Pegasus.
Yeah, but the great thing about that, if you look at the pumps, is that the reason why you can't see it is because of the light reflecting at sundown. The light coming down and reflecting off those pumps.
Yeah.
That's what's making them hard to see there.
Mm-hmm.
Now,
And now I will say this is the only painting of his that we've covered where there's actually an accessible door.
yeah, yes, there's a door there. This is a more opening and welcoming scene, you know, as it would be. These kind of spaces along the way, and not the destinations themselves. And for him to capture this, like I mean, we've been to these gas stations, stuff like that, but we never think about what it's like for those people who live there. You know, I don't think
Yeah.
about them when I leave. And the fact that like this guy is super dedicated. He's out here, he's dressed nice, he's keeping everything nice and clean. This gas station looks superb. He obviously takes a lot of pride in his work, as many people did back then. And I think that's really neat. God, there was something else I wanted to talk about. I friggin' totally spaced it.
Well, it also speaks to just, you know, like a different time, because it's not, you know, all the architecture is exactly the same at these gas stations. You know, it's got some local flavor to it that you don't see a lot.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah, and those old gas pumps are cool looking. You know, even if they weren't the most efficient things, they were cool looking.
Although they're still not quite as cool as the ones you had to pump up. It gets up into the glass container where it measured it out and then it dumps in.
Yeah, that is cool. Those ones are cool. Oh man, we'll start nerding out on another whole different things.
Autist circle number 15: gas pumps of America.
But so this is a really, I think it's an interesting psychological painting because it does appeal. It's like, hey, look, there are these places along the way to where you're going. So they're out there, and you can go and travel, and there's outposts on the outskirts of civilization. But then also, you know, the road is kind of dark as it's heading down the road, so it does kind of give you that feeling of foreboding as you're moving down the road there. Like the moving down the road isn't necessarily as welcoming as you'd like it to be, but then it is sun's going down. So all right. And with that, that's good. Well, I think we got 15 minutes to talk about the last two paintings. I think that's probably about perfect. So
excellent.
We're going to talk about his next one, which is called The Office at Night. So the same year he painted Office at Night, which is roughly 22 by 25 oil on canvas, and it is currently on display at the Walker Art Center in Minneapolis. It shows an office interior at night with the passing subway train casting a light as it rolls by on the L rail. The window is open, and you'd think the scene would be very noisy, but it seems very quiet, as they're both very intently focused characters. Shows the tension between these two people. Between them on the ground by the desk lies a single piece of paper, ostensibly dropped by the woman, but it's not sure. And this really highlighted Hopper's ability to stage complex indoor scenes. The upward angle that you're looking down from does give you kind of a voyeuristic impression, or impression of voyeuristic intent where you're intruding on the scene. And the scene also is it's a callback to the kind of noir films, and with the stereotype of the small office and the secretary.
Well, and you know, just kind of jumping back on something. Yeah, it's almost like it's a camera angle looking in.
Yeah, it does. It's framed in a very interesting way.
Hmm.
so that you are, again, you're intruding on the scene. And there's a lot of ambiguity here. We don't know, you don't know exactly what's going on. There's a lot of questions and there's a lot of tension between the two people. Is it just his secretary? Is she his secretary? You don't know. And he's so intensely looking at that work. He's not trying to um, be distracted or do anything. Uh, and you kind of get the impression that maybe she's looking at the paper she dropped on the floor, but you're not quite sure. And then again, you're not quite sure what is going on. Um, it's just an interesting scene late at night. So I'll I'll write this. I'll read what I wrote down here. Um, so the man sits at his desk, intensely focused on the work while the secretary looks on. Is it longing or rage or determination that dominates the scene? You don't know. And this is one of his pieces where he explores the spaces between men and women and the complexity of the dynamics between us.
Hmm.
And that ambiguity and tension was kind of the hallmark of his work. The tension between people and the rift that exists between people existing in the same space, right? Because we're so alien to each other um, you know, without trying to understand the other person, then you have no idea, and it
Hmm.
leaves you with a really kind of um, liminal and unnerved sense, right? It puts you on edge, kind of evolutionarily. Humans like certainty.
Yeah, yeah, because you're waiting for something to happen,
Yeah,
and you're not sure what.
yeah. And this is it's an incredibly dynamic scene because the way that light is captured by the passing train, it's cast by the trains passing by would cast light into the office buildings in a certain way, as it passed by them, right? As the window passed
Mhm.
by, it would pass light through the office building. And so you can tell that the subway is just passing by. Yet so there's that's a very dynamic motion, yet the whole scene is just frozen in tension as you try to determine what is going on. Like what is the ultimate what's the ultimate dynamic here? Is it,
Mhm.
again, is it the secretary? Are they lovers? Is that just her boss? Does she love him? Does she hate him? Is she gonna pull a fucking knife out of that cabinet drawer and stab him in the neck? You don't know. So there you go, Maureen.
Yeah,
But
I
Joe
mean,
modeled
yeah.
this. So this was another where Joe modeled for him, and then Edward modeled. I would say he modeled, but he posed, and then they recorded and posed. This was another one of those pieces where they put a lot of work into it to make sure that, like, the angle of the way that light is cast is so precise and fantastic. Um, the discoloration on the wood from it, just it's so well done.
Oh, and even just the contrast on the woman, because her, yeah, it was bugging me for a bit, and it's like, wait, no, that's the lighting from the train.
Yeah,
But it's like her legs are a different tone than her arms, and I was like, oh wait, that's because it's
yeah,
showing the light
yeah,
versus
she's
shadow. It's
she's
brilliantly
catching the
done.
light from the train. Yeah, exactly. So again, and that's another example of his brilliant use of light, um,
Hmm.
and his awareness of light and how it interacted on a scene, which not everybody knows, like not everybody understands, but he had um, a very powerful understanding of that, a Caravagist understanding of it almost.
Oh no,
So.
we can never escape Caravaggio.
Uh, so with that, we'll hop over to the very last piece that we're going to talk about right now, um, and that is, of course, Nighthawks, which he painted in 1942. This is hands down his most iconic painting. This is one of the most iconic American paintings, and it is often referred to as the American Mona Lisa,
Hmm.
because of how, like, kind of foundational it is to the American art movement, the American spirit. So, uh, I'll finish. I'll do my spiel here. So, in 1942, he created this work. It's 33 by 60, and it is currently at the Art Institute of Chicago. It was first exhibited at the Art Institute of Chicago, and then they immediately purchased it for $3,000 afterwards, which was a lot of fucking money in Ford 1942.
Oh
And
yeah, especially with a war on.
yeah, yeah. Um, and the scene shows a late night diner filled with figures who, despite their closeness, are very far apart. The painting is a product of 6 weeks of planning and layout. Triangular layout is anchored by the curved corner or counter in the middle as it plays a centerpiece for all the characters. The closeness of the man and the woman is conflicted by their indifferent expressions. You'd think they're a couple that's fighting, but you're not sure. And the only character that's attempting
Mhm.
to make or to engage with anyone is the server, and he's looking out the window. So and there's empty storefronts and empty streets. It gives the scene a very liminal feeling. That feeling of, you know, in the city late at night, in the outskirts of the city late at night. Uh, see the let's
Hmm.
see.
I also find it interesting with the coffee urns. It's like shown at two different levels. Like one's empty and one's half full. It's
Yeah,
kind of neat.
which
Nice
it's a
little
it's
detail.
it is a cool detail. And actually, I think one of them might just be hot water.
Could be, yeah.
One might be coffee, and one might be hot water for tea. Um, let's see. So in Hopper flat fashion, in typical fashion, we're excluded from the scene and we're forced to look at it from outside. We're forced to be voyeurs on this scene and look at it. Um, the glass separates us as the light spills from the diner onto the street into the silent city. And numerous films have drawn inspiration from this piece, including Blade Runner with
Hmm.
the the diners or the tavern scene there or whatever, and then also in Pennies from Heaven. And
Oh, okay.
Hopper was always so humble about his work. In typical fashion, he understated his work. He said, "I didn't paint nighthawks to express loneliness. I just made a picture of a diner I saw at night." Um,
Hmm.
and people have sought. There was a big thing at the time for people to try to find where this diner was. Nobody knew exactly where it was, and because Hopper often painted real places, people were really curious to see if they could find this setting, but I don't think they ever did. They were looking in New York, but this was not meant to be a scene in New York. Um, so
Hmm.
we're gonna look. We're
I mean,
gonna
and it's such an iconic image. I mean, that's when you think 1940s art, at least American art. This is what most people think of.
yeah, yeah, and it has the of course with the fedoras and the jackets and the ties and everything. It has that definitely that kind of early America industrial um, feeling to it. Which
Yeah.
that's such an interesting period of time that's passed, and but it did show. Um, so that period of time was a period of great expansion in both the economy and America. Uh, this was in 1942, so we were still World War II, but it was post Depression, and the um, the loneliness that like everybody thinks that cities are these big bustling places where you're always surrounded by people and all that. And a lot of the times there are, but there's also those quiet times in the city when nobody is around. And those times are so
Mhm.
unique and special and and they give you such a unique and kind of thrilling feeling. Um because it's almost like you are someplace you're not supposed to be. It's almost like you're intruding. But at the same time you can belong there. So
Okay.
So I feel like so that's why that's why I picked Hopper, is because I really thought that his work did such a great job of catching the ennui of a rapidly urbanizing society, and a
Hmm.
society that, as we were transitioning from the Depression to more industrialized society, to more modern society, you know, that left a lot of people alienated and isolated. And that's what his work was really trying to do. So he continued to paint throughout the rest of his life. And he lived until 1967. He painted all the way up till then. Um, and as he grew older and he stopped, so shortly after this, as he got older, he became, because the tides of fancy change very quickly. Um, and after a few decades, by the time it was the 50s, then his star had kind of not faded, but he had kind of gone to the background. And other American
Hmm.
artists were taking more of the foreground. And so he receded quietly and as he separated himself from the world, Joe remained his constant companion. So despite the turmoil that they had in their lives, and the conflict that they had with each other, and the loneliness that was sometime inspired by Edward, um, you can blame Joe, but really it was his own inability to interface properly, you know, uh, which is
Hmm.
often the curse of very complex people, very complex and intelligent people, which he was. So So that is Edward Hopper. Um, I think we've
Very
actually
cool.
finished like almost like
Like
perfectly on
3 minutes
time.
ahead of time.
Yeah. So that's Edward Hopper, and this is again Nighthawks. This painting was such a it's I think it's such a quintessential American image, and it harkens back to that time so well. Um, It really gives me that kind of gumshoe noir feeling to it, right? And it
Oh
may
yeah,
just
no,
be the hats and the outfits, but still.
it's that, but it's also like the very stark scenes, the very Caravaggian influenced backgrounds, and
Yeah.
that kind of the dull color palettes. Even though it's like very bright and vibrant, it's also very dull, which is
Yeah.
interesting.
Yeah, it's very bright inside. And like I said, it's bright inside where the people are together and then not talking. They're together, but they're
Yeah.
alone, you know? And yeah. So that's Edward Hopper, everybody. um, Next week, we are actually going to be talking about Salvador Dali, the surrealist who did some absolutely amazing religious work, which we're going to cover. Not just the crazy abstract stuff, and we might not actually be able to do a full 5 paintings, but we're definitely going to
We'll give it a shot.
explore. Yeah, we'll do our best. Um, but with that, I would like to thank everybody for coming out. We got LGM and Maureen in the chat for being here,
And
and,
Formo
and
has
Formo.
popped in. So.
Excellent. Um, yeah, so we'll be back next week, same bat time, same bat channel, with another episode of Autist Circle. And that's all I got. You got anything else, Bleach?
I think we're good.
All right.
Hope everybody enjoyed. Have a good one.
Have a wonderful evening.